We have one speaker this evening, and because there are 6 speakers or less, speakers will be notified at 3 minutes, but are allowed to 5 minutes to speak. We expect all speakers to honor our time limit, refrain from using any inappropriate language, and be respectful in their comments. Speakers who do not meet these expectations may be prohibited from speaking at future board and/or committee meetings. Speakers are here to address the board, not the audience. The school board and this board committee does not endorse any comments made by members of the community here tonight. We would like to remind our community members of the impact of their words on others and that our children are watching. We commit to communicating with you in respectful and productive ways and ask that you do the same. We also expect that the audience will be respectful of the speaker and of the board and refrain from responding with verbal comments, cheering, applause, or other behavior that will detract from the meeting. Please note that no obstructions can be created between the board and the audience. Visual aids cannot be used, and the area behind the speaker and podium will be clear during public comment. Also, in order to respect our speakers and meeting participants, please silence your cell phones. Our lone speaker this evening is Mr. Reese.
Again. I'm going to talk tonight about sports-related injuries and the protocols that go along with this. First off, I know a thing or two about this. Up until about 12 years ago, all I did was lift and do cardio, played softball, football all my life, did jet skied every summer. I've had 2 operations on my right knee, 1 on my left, 2 on my left shoulder, 1.5 on my right. They failed. They had to go back in there about 8 days later and redo it. I know all about injuries. I blew my back out 12, 13 years ago, lifting a table saw out of the back of the car seat to put a buddy's floor in. And that ended things for me. The doctor said this would be life-altering. And they were right at that point. They were absolutely correct. It was life-altering. But I know all about lifting and all about what goes behind it, and we're about sports injuries. And the reason I bring this up is my daughter, since she was 7 years old, I've paid to have her in club swimming. And that's a lot of money and a lot of time out of my pocket. And this year she goes into swimming and she starts complaining my shoulder hurts. They pull her out of swimming and they put her in some kind of protocol and end this year for her. And they said she would have to go see a orthopedic doctor and go through all these routes that we had to go through that I had to pay for. And I went so far as I had to kiss this season goodbye. We get 4 of them, 1's down. And not only do I have to pay for this, I have to jump through hoops, and after it comes back, the MRI, we went through all of this stuff, the MRI comes back negative. I said, okay, now what do we do? Well, I still have to go back and see this doctor again to get released. So I have to pay for more doctor visits, even after it's negative. So I asked my daughter, because I've been trying to stay out of this, because I can put my 2 cents in, and I'm letting it go. So I asked my daughter, I said, so what are you telling him the pain level is here? What is the pain level? She said, well, I don't know, 5 or 6. 5 or 6? What? And they're listening to a 14-year-old telling them that this pain level is 5 or 6. A girl that could sleep in like a pretzel and get up and jump on a trampoline a couple years ago now is training real hard and is a little sore. And because it's a little sore in her mind, well, it's a medium soreness, so it's a 5 or 6. My point is these are not arbitrary numbers that are just thrown out there, that someone says, what's your pain level? And you pick them out of the sky and you say, well, this is my pain level. There are certain things that happen to you as you progress in numbers. By the time you hit 3, you should start wincing. When someone throws something to you, you should start reacting. By the time you hit 5 or 6, you should start becoming guarded of that injury. You should not want to and try to protect this injury. And not go out. My daughter shows none of these signs whatsoever. And she lost this season because she doesn't comprehend what numbers to say.
2 minutes.
If I gave a chart here and I had a color chart here with colors on it to assign pain, and then I asked you, what color do you feel like? Well, you wouldn't know because you can't relate to it. Well, the same with her. She had no idea. But here's the flip side of what this has done. I told her she tells nobody what she feels anymore. She comes to me. So there are consequences when you treat kids like this and you do things like this. Because I'm not playing games anymore. I said, if you have an injury, you come to me. You do not go to anybody in this school and tell them. I'll take you to the doctor if it needs to be. I know how to check this. If it would have been me and she said she had problems with her shoulders and said this, the first thing I said, let's go play basketball. And I would have tossed her a ball. And just to see how she would react to catching it. She might think that I want her to throw the basket, but I want to see how she's going to react to catching it. I know how to do these things. I may have been born at night, but it wasn't last night. And to say that this kind of garbage that goes on, that I have to pay for, my daughter loses a year of experience in this, it is garbage. I'm not happy about it. And I'm going to talk to Missy tomorrow if she'll call me back. Because to pull an arbitrary number and just to use numbers and punish a kid out of a number that they can't relate to, that's garbage. And that should be addressed. That's just not right what they did to her this year. Hey, thanks.
Thank you, Paul. Is there anyone else that would like to address the committee? Alrighty, seeing none, moving on to our action item. We have one action item this evening, which would be the approval of the minutes. Be looking for a motion. Approval of the minutes.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Zenobia. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Any discussion on the minutes? Anything? Alrighty, seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? 5-0. Moving on to our discussion information items. First up is birth 3 transition to ECSE.
Thank you. Patty, if you want to come up. We have a team here tonight to talk about our birth to 3 to early childhood special education transitions that we're required to do under IDEA. We have 2 experts in this here with us, so I will stop talking and turn it over.
Excellent. Welcome.
Hi. We are here to talk about our youngest students. And you know me, early learning is one of the things that I supervise as a director of special education. I'm going to let Sarah introduce herself.
I'm Sarah Rear. I'm an early childhood special ed teacher for the district. I work mainly in the community site, so I go to the daycares and preschools. I also do all the birth to 3 transitions, and I also do the early childhood diagnostics, so I do all the testing for our littlest little ones.
Well, thanks for spending some time with us this evening.
Yes.
Yeah, we're going to give you some background information. So, there we go. Special education law went into effect back in 1975, but our most recent IDEA reauthorization was in 2004. And this is what leads to public schools providing equitable services to students who are identified with disabilities. And that scope of practice begins at the age of 3.
So our birth to 3-year-olds, I do all the transitions for our birth to 3-year-olds. So in the state of Wisconsin, children from birth to age 3 who have either developmental delays or disabilities are eligible for those services through the Department of Health and Human Services. We mostly work with Waukesha County Birth to 3, which is LSS, and that is Lutheran Social Services. But sometimes I'll get referrals from Curative or sometimes even Milwaukee County, because there'd be like a foster situation where a child is placed in Waukesha County in foster care. So we would do that transition as well. These services, the birth to 3 services, really honor the relationship of the caregivers and the child. Everything is home-based. Most of the birth to 3 service providers usually come in once to twice a month. So they're not coming in a lot. They're really working with the families, and they're looking at just delayed areas. So a child could have a delay in any of the areas, not necessarily disability, but they're showing some delays in areas where they would provide those services. So indicator 12. So the state, we actually as a district, there's 20 different indicators that we report out to the state. Indicator 12 really relates to that birth to 3 piece. What it's saying is that we have to make sure when that child turns 3 that we are providing services through the school district for those children, that there's no gap in services. So there's steps that go into this. Birth to 3 will make a notification to the school district, and I get all those notifications. It's through a portal through DPI. And I usually get those when kids are 2 years, 3 months till they're 2 years, 9 months old. That's just telling me that there's a kiddo in Waukesha School District that will be coming due for a possible referral when they're 2 years, 9 months. We will set up a transition planning conference as a TPC, and I do that with the service coordinator from birth to 3, and we set those up when the child is no less than 90 days before they turn 3. We start that 3 months, at least 3 months ahead of time, so that there isn't a gap in services, so that we can get everything done for that child, the evaluation. If they do qualify for services, then we have a plan, and everything is in place by the time that child turns 3 years of age. So once I have that meeting, and then the special education evaluation process begins, and like I said, if they qualify for services, everything has to be done by the time they turn 3. The TPC, so I really enjoy these transition planning conferences. It's a chance for, that I get to kind of meet with the birth to 3, but we're meeting with the parents. We set up the meetings that works for the families. We meet at the families' homes, except during COVID, we did them virtually. This is just a really key relationship piece for us. It really gives the families a chance to talk with the school district. They've trusted birth to 3, so it's kind of passing that on. I spend a long time, usually 45 minutes to an hour. We talk about, their concerns, the progress they've made with birth to 3, and the differences between birth to 3 and the school district. For the school district, we look at actual disability area. So sometimes for some of these families, this is the first time, they're really looking at a disability versus just a need that their child has. So sometimes these conversations are pretty difficult, so that's why that relationship is really important during this time. So I usually spend a good amount of time talking with the families about what we'll be looking at as far as the school district. And usually, like with birth to 3, they look at just an area. So early learning, gross motor, fine motor, adaptive, social emotional, or communication. For the school district, we look at an area, disability area. So sometimes that's the first time we're bringing up educational autism, or if they have a disability or a diagnosis, we look at OHI, or for our little ones, we look at significant developmental delay. So sometimes those are really tough conversations to have, so this is a really important time to connect with families and work on that next step.
Besides our birth to 3 transition for children, we also have a legal responsibility to address child find. The federal law requires that we give parents the opportunity to access screening and resources, whether or not they have concerns about their child's development, so that we don't miss any children in our community that we should be identifying. We address that by using our census to provide a mailing out to parents of the ages and stages questionnaire. That's our screening tool. And we invite families to attend an in-person screening opportunity. We hold those monthly. That gives us an opportunity for the child to have a play-based activity time with one of our early learning professionals, early childhood teachers such as Sarah, or speech-language pathologists. We have staff there who speak English or Spanish, so we can serve our community. And those professionals can discuss with the parents any concerns that are raised around development or concerns they have at home, and if need be, we can go to the point of writing a referral for special education. When it comes to referrals for special education, each year we evaluate approximately 225 preschoolers. And we are serving every year about 175 to 200 preschool students each year with individualized education plans to address their needs in communication, social interaction, learning needs, behavior, or motor development. For that number of students, we have a variety of service delivery options. By far the majority of our preschoolers that we identify with a need are little ones who need speech therapy because they are not easy to understand yet. So if it's speech therapy only that the student needs, we have a variety of avenues to serve those needs. Our elementary school speech pathologists can provide walk-in speech therapy. And we also have speech pathologists that go out to our 4K partner sites, our community preschools and daycares. When a student has needs more involved, more than just speech therapy, and they might have multiple providers from the district necessary to meet their needs, we also have classroom-based services in our elementary schools, along with our traveling staff such as Sarah, who go to the 4K partner sites, preschools, and daycares. Our in-district sites include these 5 elementary schools. At Higher, we have a 4K dual language classroom where we also place what we consider to be a multi-age classroom, where we have 3-year-olds that attend perhaps 2 half-days a week in order to get their special education on site in that classroom. Lowell has a self-contained early childhood classroom. Prairie has a self-contained early childhood classroom and the 4K multi-age opportunity. Summit View has 4K multi-age, and then our community sites include our 4K partners and preschools and daycares.
So for our early childhood programs, like Patty had mentioned, we have a couple of the early childhood classrooms, and those are for our 3 and 4-year-olds who are, more than just the speech and language, are showing more developmental delays. Those are 2 days a week for 2.5 hours per session, and all the services for that child are delivered within the classroom. So there's speech and language. If they need OT or PT, those are all provided within the classroom. Our 4K co-teaching for the multi-age, we have an early childhood special ed teacher within that classroom. So we do have some students that are not in 4K that can go into that program. They're still there, those just 2 days a week for 2.5 hours. Or we do have 4K students that need special ed that might be in those classrooms as well. So in those classrooms, you have the regular ed teacher, the early childhood special ed teacher, and they co-teach those rooms. Community sites, I do a lot of the community sites. We also have Head Start, where we have an early childhood special ed teacher there as well. For these, I visit the daycares and the preschools and the 4K community sites, usually about twice a week, depending on the child. And I work not only with the child, but I also coach the staff and work with them on modifications and accommodations that that child may need, because I'm not there all the time. So there is some coaching that goes along with that, besides just working one-on-one or within the classroom. And all my services are done within the classrooms, within daycares and the preschool settings. So our early childhood programming, at this age, services are individually designed to address those early learning needs. So these are the areas that we look at: the communication, how they're communicating, whether they can be verbal or nonverbal, social interactions, the biggest piece there is that play, physical development, both fine and gross motor, cognitive development, so their early learning skills and their adaptive skills. And we work, the teacher will go and work on these areas, and they really look at their IEP goals and how they connect with these 5 areas. And then transition. So when we transition from EC to the elementary school, again, this is another relationship piece where, we have been with the family for a little while, so we really have maintained and had this wonderful relationship with them throughout their early childhood experience. So the transition to go up to elementary schools, we usually set up another meeting, and we usually do that in February, March usually, and we meet with the new team to really talk about that child's needs. It creates a relationship with the family and the future team, and it helps the new team with, have an understanding of what that child needs and what has worked for that child. And it really creates a smooth transition for both the student and the family.
And we're wondering if you have any questions for us.
Any questions for
I know, turn it.
Mr. Montiel?
Thank you. Sarah, I think you mentioned OHI. I don't know what that is.
It's other health impairments.
Okay.
So a lot of times if they already have a diagnosis that's really affecting their vitality, their alertness, in the educational setting, we look at OHI.
Okay.
Sorry, I used too many.
You sure can.
And then you said child find. Is that a federal law that requires efforts to be made to locate students that may need special education?
Exactly.
Yep.
Good deal. Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Murr?
So thank you, ladies, for being here with us. I'm so sorry. Thank you, ladies, for being here with us today. And I want to just give my hats off to both of you, because You two have some of the toughest jobs. So thank you for that. I did have a question about the transition planning conference at TPC that you all set up. Can you just give an example, like what that what that looks like? Like, what's one example that you had with a parent and a child, and how did that conference go?
So I do those, we set those up for any child that's going to be referred to the district. So usually the birth to the 3 coordinators set those up. They look at the parents' schedules, and I usually try to be as flexible as I can so that I'm meeting on what works best for the parents. And we go to the home, and usually the child's there, so we all kind of sit on the floor, that's just normal, and really talk about their concerns and the progress that they've made in birth to 3 so far, and kind of moving forward on, what that looks, and I kind of go through each area. I'm like, so what does their early learning look like? What does their social emotional look like? And then we decide as a team, do we look at just that communication piece, or is there more going on? So that's usually how those conversations go.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Montiel?
Thank you. I think you mentioned you assess 225 students a year and you service 175 to 200, something like that?
Yep.
Is that the percentage of, I can't talk. So is that, what is that, 80% assessments result in?
We might assess kids at 3
Okay.
or at 4.
Okay.
So there's a parent referral or a child find screening opportunity, and some kids, the 200 kids we have this year, some of them started with us last year. So yes, there are some children who we evaluate who we do not find a need for special education, and we provide their parents with some suggestions for home practice for perhaps mild concerns. We celebrate those. They don't need an identification.
Okay. Good deal. Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, Mr. Zenobia.
Thank you. So give us a little bit of perspective of what happens with the students after the, 4K. I'm assuming that not all of these are going to enter the school district of Waukesha, correct? Or do they all come to us? Is that?
All these students, the reason we do the TPC is they're already Waukesha School District students. So even when they're 3 and we identify them with a disability, they're considered Waukesha School District students. And so then we, as soon as they get older, they just keep going on. And once they're go into kindergarten, we look at having them go to their neighborhood school.
So then what is kind of the tracking or the process that goes? So maybe they don't need this level of service after this point, but then how do these students progress, and, how do you track that and watch that? And
Yep. So in special education law, we're required to annually review the child's progress because they've got goals to work on. We track their progress toward those goals, determine what new goals the child might need. That's an annual process. And at least every 3 years, we reevaluate. So some of these students have a 3-year reeval. Sometimes we reevaluate earlier than that if we feel like we have more information and we need to consider a different area of disability. A lot of these students are identified with speech only, and they don't stay in speech for very long. So they might be done in less than 3 years, or maybe they're done in 4 years, but they get dismissed from special ed. All of the students make progress along the way. A lot of times our 3-year-olds come in and they are nonverbal and they communicate with their behavior, and 3-year-olds are pretty uncivilized little creatures. So they make progress learning more about how to socially interact, fine motor, gross motor, routines, pre-literacy, pre-numeracy skills, and they go on to kindergarten and they receive special education in the elementary schools if they continue to demonstrate that need.
are we pretty, are we pretty well staffed in this area? I guess I'm asking from a perspective of, I hear that our funding in these areas is very low, is what I hear. As a general rule, I'm not saying necessarily the school district of Waukesha, but are there areas that we could use more resources? I know that's a very general question, but as far as a staffing issue, as far as the people we have doing this work, where does that kind of sit right now? I mean, are we in good shape there? We need more, we need less? We never need less, right?
Yeah, there's two parts to that question. The
Yeah.
part is, have we adequately staffed? Yes.
Sure.
The broader statewide discussion around categorical reimbursement, where special education is reimbursed at 30%, the state is not meeting its obligation to local school districts when it comes down to funding. If you were to go back 15, 20 years, the state used to fund special ed at about 70%, and it's written into law that the state and the feds will fund it at 100%. So at 30%, what's happening is out of local taxpayer dollars, there's a huge transfer that happens each year from the general fund 10 to the fund 27 in order to balance off then what the school districts, what's the local obligation. And that's been increasing over time. So that's the broader statewide discussion, is what is the level of categorical reimbursement, which has, over the course of my career, 20 years now, 21 years, has gone from about 60, 65% down to its current level of 30, and prior to that, it was as low as like 26, 27. So that's where the big issue is. It's shifted the burden, what was a statewide obligation, it's shifted that then to the local funds, and that is what the statewide discussion is. Because if that reimbursement were there for local school districts, then you would start to look at every year when we're cutting the 2 million, 3 million, 5 million, whatever it is out of our budget, you're not looking at having to cut as much local money because the state's meeting its obligation to us, and it just currently isn't doing that.
Thank you.
Alrighty, any other questions? Does the Head Start program loop through this at all? It does, that's what I thought.
So that's one of our community sites.
Yep, okay.
Yep.
And where is that? Is that at?
That's the Centers for Excellence.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Okay, excellent.
And that's a Waukesha County
Yep.
provider.
Yep.
Right,
But yeah, we're very closely connected there.
Yep.
We have staff that go into the site to provide
Okay.
service.
okay. And then how about because aren't there other programs, 3K programs? Does La Casa have a?
So
thought you
yes,
did,
so
yes.
any preschool or daycare that has like a 3-year-old program, if it's within the school district of Waukesha,
Okay.
then that's usually, we can go in and work with those students. But in those private schools, once they're 4K,
Right.
then it turns into a different type of programming because we just,
Yeah, and La Casa is a public school,
Yeah.
but it's a charter school.
Charter
Right,
school.
yeah.
So they provide their own services starting at
at
4K.
4K.
Oh, okay, they do. Excellent, thank you. Mr. Moore?
Well, thank you. I want to wrap up my comments again by just saying I commend you to, I don't think people really understand how hard it is doing the work that you are doing. And so I genuinely, I need to say that to you. These are some tough jobs. And so especially working with students who may have, severity of needs, whatever. Not everyone can do those jobs. So if it was easy, everyone would do it. But you two are doing it, and I want to just say thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, thank you very much. Fantastic presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next up on our discuss information items is policy 2416, student privacy and parental access to information.
Mr. Zenobia last month asked that we put this on the agenda and discuss it. So it's on the agenda for discussion.
Okay. Would you like to kick it off?
I guess I will start.
Excellent, thank you.
Well, thank you for bringing this forward. In looking at the policies that we have currently, I did not see another policy that kind of looked into the area that I think is left unattended to in this policy, and that is the area that discusses parental rights or information when it concerns students who may be going through a gender identity transformation or what have you. So to bring this forward, the reason this specific policy is, I feel that maybe we need additional policies that are specific to this area. I think without that, we open up ourselves to some areas of just the general policy of the district, of any district, to be undermined when things like this are not being disclosed. So that was my reason for bringing it forward. I don't see anything in the policy because it's outdated to address that. I think that should be the focus going forward. How do we address some of these issues that are already, to my understanding, occurring in just about every school district and here in Waukesha? So if anybody would want to grab that one first. Don't know who to direct that to, maybe Dr. Cook.
Yeah, certainly, we can look and see what the landscape looks like around that. There are a number of things that we always have to consider when, getting specific as to what policy. Have to look at, prevailing guidance that we're getting from the Department of Education, from the Department of Public Instruction, what laws are out there that, kind of govern this area for us before we would, craft a specific policy on it. Is there something specific to this that the committee would like us to dig into?
For clarification,
Yeah.
specific to his comment, Mr. Zenobia's comment, or specific to this policy overall?
I mean, either one. I just, would be looking for some direction before we would start to generate policy language on, on this particular topic. I mean, there's always a number of things that would need to be considered when you're looking at policies, and it starts with relevant, legal guidance that we get, or statutory guidance, or federal law that might govern an area.
One thought, I guess, is the deciding what the district's policy would be for the situation that Mr. Zenobia brought up. What should it be, what's appropriate? And I guess taking into consideration some of the things you mentioned, Dr. Cook, what legally, or just some of the other guiding policies or principles that we already have, whatever you had referred to earlier. It's just an initial thought from me.
Sure. More specifically, my primary concern is when a student wants to change their gender identity, and that would be hidden from the parents. So it would become a parental rights issue for the parents to know what is going on with their child in the school district. Furthermore, the policy would also not address parents that do know what is going on with their students and are already involved in the process of them going through a gender identity change. So there's two different things there. We don't have a policy to walk us, the district, through how are we going to handle this, from what I can see or where I can find it. And yet, many other districts throughout the state and throughout the nation are already dealing with this. So it's perhaps a twofold issue, where parents are involved and they are consenting, and where parents are not involved, do not know, and would not consent. So those are two very different areas, and they're two areas that I think are very important to examine.
So just so I understand, so specific to policy, would you be looking for a policy or a guideline as to the process that a student would go through? I mean, the policy would be more, like a statement of philosophy by the board and how they wanted it to be handled. And then the guideline then that would be provided would be, how do we handle the situations? For instance, like for any formal change that would happen in our system, it would be done with parents' knowledge, because it has to go through the enrollment office. Nobody can, I can't formally change my name without following the enrollment processes in the district. And so, year to year, we do get situations where that a parent is making that election with their child and the paperwork is filled out. Are you referring to the situations where that isn't formally being recognized in the system? It would just be the discussion that's happening in and around what the child would, for instance, want to be called at school, but not formally designated in the system? Because there's two levels of that. There's the kind of the forward-facing level, but then there's the level of it that requires actually a legal name change, an identity change. And, in these situations, when they come up, we need to be explicit with people as to what does this process allow you to access, because anything, any legal name change requires action through the court. And then that actually is the thing then that gets recognized. For instance, when a child is applying for the ACT, federal student aid, when they're getting recognized, like in the forward exam, none of that is always based off of the birth certificate and everything like that. It's those other layers, I think, that we might need to sort out. But are you looking for policy and guideline, or?
I think both. I think the board should certainly have policy that lays these things out. On the many levels that you're talking about, it's a very complex process. And I fully appreciate the parents that are already involved in doing these things. As you mentioned, legally, that's an entirely different situation. And the policy can speak to that as well. But my primary concern is when things are being done, name changes, without the parent's knowledge. And there is no policy for that. And there is also, from what I've seen, no policy to guide the board or the district through. Now, there may be guidelines that I haven't seen, okay? But there's no policy that says this is how things should progress. I know there are many guidelines out there that other districts are using, from federal, state, and local. So there's a ton of information out there on things you can do. All of it is guiding students down a path of going this route. None of it is, from what I can see, any type of pushback that would say, okay, well, hang on a second, let's go to the parents on this. So that's where I'm coming from. I don't want to get out ahead of the board as a whole in discussing this and looking at a policy, but I don't think one exists. Therefore, I think we should be looking to craft something that does exist and something, that can be worked off in the future.
Mr. Montiel?
Thank you. I appreciate the comments, and I looked at this, and I'm looking at it obviously now. What I'm curious about is the situation where a student would come to classroom and say, I want to be called such and such, and don't tell my parents. What are our employees, what are the teachers, what are district employees, what's their directive? How are they supposed to deal with that? I don't know if we have a policy for that.
Yeah, and we certainly can look into some of those things. I mean, Mr. Monty, I'm not trying to throw your profession out there, but I mean, as you know, like when you create a practice, that practice has to be something that can be universally applied to all. Because, right. I mean, if I were to have a nickname and it's a deep-held nickname that my friends call me and that I've used at school, and I'm just like, you don't have to talk to my parents about it, does that nickname then not get, if my parents want me called Joseph instead of Joe,
yeah,
but I hate it, and I just want to be called Joe, is that a situation that triggers this? Or is this something that then goes beyond that? And I think, I mean, going back to when I was in school, I mean, I started out as Joey, then it went to Joe, then it went to whatever my parents were calling me in a parent-teacher conference too.
Right.
So I think that is some of the consideration that needs to be taken in. When we start getting into formal stuff, we do have the formal process of everything going through our enrollment office. Right. And that was to make sure that we're being very mindful of what, like the DPI put out last year with the Infinite Campus rollover and identity name in there versus not. The enrollment office requires parental participation for that. So those are some considerations. I think Mr. Zenobia, in bringing this up, it's one of those things that's going to take us a little bit of time to try to see where the guidance is on it and see what examples exist out there. But certainly something that we can be, discussing if you give us a little bit of time to put it together as a committee.
Yeah, regarding the policy we're looking at, and student privacy. What is the extent of the student's privacy rights regarding, I guess, gender identity, or I don't know what exactly, I think that's the context you're discussing. And how do you bump that up against a parent's right to know what their minor child is doing in school, and then what's the school's obligation to disclose. And as you mentioned, that is a whole lot of competing, very important interests that have a whole lot of federal and state laws and guidelines. So, yeah, I would fully anticipate that this has been, or will take quite some time. But as Mr. Zenobia mentioned too, this is something that is happening and other districts are dealing with. So I think getting out in front of it, at least starting the process to see, what is our policy, is a good idea.
We can certainly work through something in the next, I don't know if it could be ready by our November meeting, but certainly when we get together in December, we can begin to discuss this. It's, but it is something that's going to take a little bit of time, just knowing that the legal landscape around it is in flux. There's not much that's settled on this particular topic now.
I mean, the formal is obviously easy. Everything's got to go through.
Correct.
So they can't change it without a parent's, unless it's an emancipated minor.
Right. I mean, if you're 18,
Right.
you can call yourself what you want. If your parents, if the
Yep.
courts have awarded you on your own,
Yep.
you call yourself what you want, change it, go to
Right.
court to change it. I mean, you're recognized as an
Yeah.
adult then. Yep.
Okay, so there's also that little blemish in there when you're 18. It is what it is.
No, this is
So-
not about,
So you're mainly worried about the informal, the day-to-day operational at the school level.
the informal and the unreported, I would call it.
Well, yeah,
So-
because, I mean, so the formal, an actual change in the system, the parents would be notified unless the child is
Sure.
18 or,
Right.
I mean, and is that codified in policy? Because that would be an easy policy or guideline to craft. I mean, this is what we're doing right now.
Right, from a
formal.
to the 2 degrees of formality that
Yes,
we would have.
right.
Yes, the enrollment process where the identity in infant and campus would reflect a change that has, been with parent knowledge,
Right.
to the formal, which would be recognized at the state level in state reporting that you would use for your college applications, whatever. That obviously requires either individual pursuit or parental
Yeah.
involvement for that one. The informal is the one that, happens on the day-to-day to school, and
Right.
that becomes something where if you're going to put a policy in place, it has to be something that, it can be universally applied and doesn't signal out, one group of students.
Right.
And just to clarify, again, this is in my view, a parental rights issue. And if it is the parental prerogative to change the name of your son or daughter, and that is not what I'm concerned with. What I'm mostly concerned with is, if you want to call it the informal or the unreported, the hidden attempts by staff in any district to have a child say that they want to do this, and then show them the path to do that without any parental involvement and without making it known to parents, takes away the parental right and of the parent. Now, I know there's other extenuating circumstances to even that, which again, we have no guidance, no policy, and that is my concern. So, I know this is very complicated, it's very layered, and I don't think our district or any district can go forward for long without trying to address this in policy. So, that's my.
Mr. Montiel?
Just to state the obvious, the concerns about the parents' right to know, I get it, I understand, I agree 100%. But to state the obvious, the most important side of that equation, I'm not saying you're not agreeing to this or assuming anything, is the student. If they're going through this, they're going through so much already that we need to, if we're going to craft a policy or procedure, it has to be so carefully done that we do not add anything more to that student's stress load, life issues. They have so much on their plate already that if we're going to do this, it has to be done perfectly, or as near perfectly as possible, considering all those other things, because our job is to do everything we can to educate students. And if someone's going through that already, they're already in a difficult situation, dealing with so much, on top of getting a public education. So my attention is going to be not only on that, but on everything else about how do we do this perfectly. And to do anything perfectly is impossible. So unless it's done as close to perfectly as possible, I guess I'm going to hold it to a very high bar. But there's a way. I'm sure there's a way. If there, there's a way. It's our job. We got to find it. So I appreciate the administration's assistance in looking at all that, and we'll do it all and do the best we can if that's the direction the board chooses.
Mr. Moore?
Thank you for that, Mr. Zenobia and Mr. Montiel. And I'm sure there's a way too. I'm with you, Mr. Montiel and Mr. Zenobia. And that's kind of where I was at in my head while, both of you were speaking, that, of course there's a way. It's just, to, how are we going to craft it, and, to, and how, and what layers are we going to have to go through in order to make sure that it's done right. And Mr. Zenobia's point to him, definitely agree with him too. And you, Mr. Montiel, he said that, there's mysterious circumstances, which, as a teacher myself, I know, I have kids that I deal with or come across, or most teachers do that, their lives are not so great at home, or, they may have circumstances that would just, rock your world that you would never think that they would be going through too. Yes, it's a tough situation to be in on how we kind of draft that policy and what that looks like. But there is a way, and I'm with Mr. Zenobia and you on that, and Dr. Cook. So that's kind of where I'm at, just, how we're going to do it. So, but I'm hopeful there's a way, though. So.
Yeah, so not to get too far ahead, but I think this speaks to the layers that you mentioned, Dr. Cook, of this issue overall. So I don't know if this is part of, what I'm about to say, is this part of this policy or something different, but once, I guess, that is addressed as far as like the gender transition and parents' rights versus the students, et cetera, then it's the issue of how does the district, I guess, address those students, and, what are they considered within the district, as far as what sports teams they play on, what bathrooms they go to, and whatever else, clubs, et cetera. So, again, I don't know if it would be part of this, but maybe that's part of, the layers or the thinking kind of long-term.
We would certainly have to gather the prevailing guidance on all of what you mentioned, to inform a policy or a guideline in the system.
All right, any other comments, discussion? Okay. Ready? It's a lot of work. Alrighty. You got something else?
Yeah, I had some
All right,
other
go, Mark.
questions about
Okay.
policy overall,
Alrighty.
sorry.
This policy, not the one that they're crafting.
Right, yeah,
Okay.
this one right
Okay.
now. So, I don't know if it was stated in here how students are made aware of their, I guess, right to privacy, if you will, at least the way it's stated in this policy. Does anyone know that?
There would be area by area and situation by situation. So like your right to privacy on certain topics is, a student would have a right to privacy in those topics. In other areas, there would be 100% parent access. So for instance, in Infant and Campus, when it comes down to grades, IEPs, Section 504 plans, our progress monitoring of a student behavior, parent-teacher conferences, the opportunity to inspect instructional materials. Parents have free access to all of that. There are situations, though, for instance, and I'd use mandatory reporting of abuse and neglect, where a parent doesn't have a right to know who made the report. A parent doesn't have a right to know what was reported. That gets deferred over to the police or to the Department of Health and Human Services, and it becomes their responsibility then to look into that. So there are things that, there's just not a blanket universal way to address every situation that our staff are working with kids on a day-to-day basis. There's There's stuff that teachers would be privy to and teachers would have access to, but we have student services staff that, gets into healing components with kids after they've been abused. They're coming to them to access their education because they can't make it through the school day. There's layers of confidentiality that goes with that some of it is shared and some of it isn't shared based off of what is being discussed, and also the age of the students. Elementary child, that's one thing, but high school kid, that there's more confidentiality for the student as they get older in this state.
And maybe I should have given an example of kind of what comes to mind for me. So one of the things in here is political affiliations or beliefs of students. So, they're taking history classes, they're taking government classes, maybe just even a writing class that might pick a political topic to write on or whatever. I don't know if students are aware that an assignment a teacher might propose, or an activity in class that they might propose, or that they're just involved in that day, that maybe shouldn't be being done because it's identifying their political views. Unless, of course, it does state on page 2 that parents would be made aware of it through meetings or communications, maybe a document sent home that they would sign and know about. But I'm just wondering if, students might be being involved in these situations without even knowing that, hey, this really shouldn't be being talked about in class. So I'm not sure how that's,
Policy, and I'm going to forget the number, 2460, controversial issues in the classroom, covers politics, covers, those deeply held beliefs that someone might have. And it talks how the teacher would have to address those in the classroom if that was being asked. A recent example, it was a year or two ago, there were a handful of teachers that were used a form, and on top of it, it talked about what do you want to be called in class, and then asked the question of pronouns. We immediately, upon knowing that, sent out guidance to discontinue the use of that. That I think Mr. Borowski gets to your point. When we're made aware of situations where if that is being violated, we cease that activity immediately, and then discontinue any of that classroom type questionnaire maybe that was given out at the beginning of the year. So we handle that right away. Okay. To the extent that, I'll give you another example. I was in an AP class doing a walkthrough, and they were preparing for the AP test. And the AP tests are often a lot of free writing, and they're looking for what type of argument you can construct on that AP essay. And the kids were asking a variety of controversial issues of the teacher. Can I write on what would happen to me if? And the teacher had to handle that within the scope of the discussion. It was kid-generated discussion. The teacher wasn't asking it, but sure. These were the ideas that the kids had in order to write about on the AP examination. Sophomores, juniors, seniors in high school who were, trying to access that college credit that comes along with AP. So, again, each situation is going to be treated, very differently. We wouldn't be asking certain questions at the elementary level, but the secondary level, the high school level, those things might be student generated and the teacher has to address it. So is it controversial? Do we cover it under that policy? Do we have it under the parent right and access? What are the kids' rights? I mean, all of that starts to play into and sometimes these are very dynamic situations.
Sure.
We also then deal with the curriculum that's kind of delivered to us every day. If there's a major news event, if there's a major world event, if something happens and the kids are talking about it, how does the teacher then help the kids process that? Because it is a big event, and that inevitably spills into the classroom. And so we do work with our staff on how to entertain some of those things, and that's part of the art of the teaching. I mean, we can go specific example after specific example,
right?
But
it sounds to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think essentially what you're saying is it's up to the teacher and maybe the parents knowing what rights that,
correct.
privacy rights that their students have and that they have, and kind of trusting that that's,
From a curricular experience, and for those of you who are on the Teaching and Learning Committee, there's been a lot of curricular resources that have been put in front of the committee, and the committee reviews those curricular resources, gives you generally a pretty good idea of what is being taught in class, unit by unit in school. And those resources will, talk about, for instance, I mean, if it's an environmental ed thing, you'll see environmental topics. If it's a social studies thing, you'll see social studies topics, and you'll see things perhaps that butt up against that, that controversial issues in the classroom policy. So, I mean, those are all areas that come up, and they're built in, and it's part of the material review that you do as committee members. Could something else get into the classroom? Yes. When we've been made aware of it, that pushes the limit, we address it, and make sure that it's not used anymore in class, so.
Okay. I think that's,
Yeah.
questions, yeah.
Anything else regarding this policy or recommendations? Okay. Moving on. Our last discussion information item of the evening is the discipline work group update.
So, yeah, as we progress forward, with our discipline committee work, again, I'm just going to be providing you as a monthly update where we're at and what we're doing as a committee. So we met on September 20th last month, and our primary objective is, again, those first couple months, we're looking at what is the root cause of, where things are at in our system. So we did take a quick look back. We did have a discipline committee that met for almost a year and a half back in the 1920 years. And we just did a review of some of the conclusions that committee made and what the next steps were that came out of that. And then we took just a school level discussion on behavior, our observations, and then what we saw recorded in Wise Dash from an office discipline standpoint. So if you remember a month ago, I provided you a few handouts that showed where we were at for referrals and suspensions. That was the early data. We're going to be using a book. It's not like a book club read or anything like that, but Mark Leonard, our Director of Student Services, and I attended a one-day workshop this summer through Solution Tree. It's behavior solutions through our RTI model. And so RTI, the response to intervention, multi-level systems of support, I mean, those are things that we've been working on in schools for 10 to 15 years now, so it's familiar terminology. And what it does is it takes us, step by step through what are you seeing in your school? Do you have a school plan that addresses it? What are you doing for the universal, student who, is picking up on your behavior approach? What are we looking at a tier 2 level, kids who need a little bit more reinforcement? So we're going to use this as a guide to our discussion. One of the things that we talked about early on is, are we settling on a model? And this isn't a model, but it is a good resource for our teams to begin to go through this exploration this year, and as well as trying to address behavior in our schools. Next month, we're going to be meeting on the 26th. I'm sorry, not next month, this month, next week. We'll be meeting on the 26th. We're going to continue every month to look at where our data is at. I put some sheets in front of you that we can talk about a little bit tonight. But what we're going to do then, going into November and December, is beginning to dig into, what do our school plans look like? And I think that's been a component, of our work, and it's admittedly, I think, out of all of our leaders, where we know what our data is, but within the scope of our day-to-day, we're not doing a good job of planning and addressing it. Good example around that, and I'll continue to come back to it, it's more of an elementary example. Like, what are your expectations and what's being taught at lunch? What are your expectations and what is being taught and reinforced during the recess time? And then what behavior are you seeing in those class periods right after that lunch break? And Mr. Moore can probably speak from experience. Lunch recess can often lead to generally a pretty squirrely group after that period of time. So, and then what behaviors are you seeing? Are you seeing kids having a difficult time regulating? And then what can we do? What can we teach and plan around? So, as we go forward, when you get this update in November after our October meeting, you'll see some of those steps that we're taking. One example that I do want to point out to you, and I did provide these sheets to you, an area where we are taking a concerted approach this year. I mentioned it last year. It's the sheet number of incidents by year between September 1st and October 18th. So it's this sheet for the committee. If you look under personal technology violations, so I guess before we get there, at the bottom of the page, we see that there's 2,000, back to 1920, 2,280 office discipline referrals during the same time span. This year, there's 2,246 office discipline referrals. An area where we are making a concerted effort to try to address, the teachers and the administrators is in that personal tech violation. And you can see right now that we have approximately 200 more referrals this year for personal technology than we did 1 year ago. So one of the things that we want to be able to do through our work is to be able to tell the story as to why things are happening. We want to understand it. We don't simply want to be able to say like, hey, we're seeing more dysregulated kids, we're seeing more aggression and fighting, but we don't know why that's happening. So I can accurately report to you that our secondary schools, our middle schools, and our high schools are focusing on cell phone use this year. And that is where you're seeing a substantial increase. Now, over time, through the implementation of the cell phone caddies at the high school, working with kids and parents to understand, we hope then that number will start to decrease as the school year goes forward. But initially, this is an area of increase. So as you look at these numbers, understand that there are some areas where our schools, and this is one, are making an absolute concerted effort. Some areas that we're discussing as a committee, that first one on there, the aggression and threatening behavior. That's an area where we are working to more specifically kind of at that tier 2, 3, that more intensive level on what are we seeing, why are we seeing it, at what grade levels are we seeing it, when are we seeing it during the school day, so that we can begin to come up with those plans. And as time goes forward this year, when schools, for instance, present to you on their SAIL plans, or when they come forward at this committee during the second semester and talk about what they're focusing on, they'll be able to get more into the specifics of that. But know that that's on our horizon here in the next month, to begin to dig into what are we seeing in our plans, what is our belief system as an organization, our staff and our administrators around this, and then where are we effective and where aren't we effective. We'll be getting into in the weeds with that in this next month and next 2 months, October and November.
Questions? Mr. Mateo?
Is there a chance we could get a copy of the book for the board members?
Yeah, we can order some extras.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you. Actually, how big is it?
About 250 pages.
Okay.
It's not a theory book. It's not a book club book. I just want to, this is not going to be on somebody's book list to recommend for reading.
Right.
It's more of a manual. So if before we order them, if you wanted to stop up and take a look at one of them, you could just peruse it in the office before we ordered extra copies. But we're happy to have a few extra around if you so choose. I mean, it's up to you. I'd ask that you take a look at it beforehand, because it might be like the manual that you have for your pickup truck, and it might not be that exciting to you in the end.
Okay, I'll come take a peek at it.
Yeah.
You asked for it before.
Yeah, I guess so. My homework now. Okay.
Mr. Zenobia?
If you order extras, Corey can have mine.
It's two then.
So, question, if I look at the overall total here, comparing it with the last 2 years isn't fair due to the COVID interruptions, but if I'm looking at 2019, it's pretty close to that number, although a lot of these categories and things have changed. I mean, it's not as high, but it's close. I mean, is that, so, how, just generally speaking, how does this break down? This is K through 12, correct?
Correct.
So, I can't see it on this sheet, maybe it's somewhere else, but by grade, roughly, are we seeing instances, magnified in middle school versus high school, or is it pretty much all uniform for where it has been?
If I were to make a kind of across the system generalization, the behavior that we're seeing in 4-year-old kindergarten and first grade, second grade, is much higher than what it has been. This is anecdotal. Anecdotally, our secondary administrators have said this is kind of like pre-pandemic middle school, high school type behavior. They're dealing with the kind of that. Last year was goofy for everybody, but this year they're talking, it's, I don't want to say the same run of the mill, but it's stuff that they have seen before in frequencies that they've seen before at the middle and the high school level. The concerning grades are those young grades where the entire school experience up until this point had been, disrupted by COVID. Those are the grades where people are saying, we're seeing more extreme behavior, we're seeing more frequency of behavior, and it's really more at the elementary level. That's not to say we're not seeing high behaviors at the high school. It's just not standing out to people more so than what they had experienced in the past. And that's general across our entire school district. That's not, we could talk about, specific schools are seeing more than other schools, but that's kind of just a general, what's been reported by the principals. And if we dug into the data, we'd see that at a higher rate. But our special education referrals, you heard the presentation on the birth to 3 early childhood transition. We're seeing a lot of referrals to special education at a young age right now. Usually we end the school year at about 2020 kids who are receiving special ed services. We're already at 2016 out of 11,816. We're already at 17% identification. And I would anticipate that number will continue to rise, and it'll continue to rise at that early elementary level. As we're going to see higher rates there than we've seen in the past. So that's a very real thing for us to plan around.
Yep.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you mentioned planning. I think, you mentioned me earlier, like, yes, I can definitely understand. And I can definitely understand. And one of the things that I do believe, like you said, mostly at the younger grades. So some of the things that, I'm willing to say is I'm willing to work with you all as I am in this field and I'm going through it myself is sometimes, like you said, after lunch, and I think some of this behavior disruption throughout the day is mostly after the lunch and recess. Because when students tend to come to school in the morning, they seem fine because they're just still waking up. So, but once they get that energy in them, they, things get a little crazy. So I think what will be helpful for our younger grades is that, working with the teachers and admin to maybe do some resets and stuff. So reset in the morning, going over routines and procedures and what that looks like, and then after lunch when they come back, we may have to do another reset for the afternoon. So, resetting what the expectations and routines and procedures are for the classroom and the school. So, all right, friends, we're going to talk about what it looks like when we transition from lunch and recess. How should it look and how should it sound? So continuously practicing that. Kind of, giving them that reset. And also for the secondary students who, find themselves in these situations, in these incidents, who may be returning from disruption behavior or personal technology violation or, constantly defying insubordination, giving them some, resets and stuff. So when we do return to school, what are we going to do differently and stuff like that to kind of get these incidents down and so that the students specifically don't end up in these same situations after we go through a reset, and a fresh start, if you will, and also for the school district to kind of get it down too, which I'm hopeful for. So I'm extending myself willing to work with the administration and kind of get some more guidance outside of the meeting if they do need my help. And kind of work with them, again, continuously to try to make progress in this area of incidents. So.
Yeah, Mrs. Zenobia?
Just one last comment. I know you've brought up the technology concerns a number of times, every time we have this conversation. And I assume everything is being done that can be done right now around that issue. Is there something the board should look at or consider, again, probably in policy that would help, or, just to consider this area?
Board already has no cell phones in the policy, and so that's already in there. We go through and we discipline with this. There's levels of discipline when we start dealing with the tech violations. We can begin to treat kids as repeated refusers, and that's a category. But in the grand scheme of behavior right now, those are things that are being addressed, but they're not rising, for instance, in some areas to the same level as when kids are bringing vapes to school and marijuana vape to school. When those things are happening, hey, put your cell phone away, is, sometimes the extent that she can get it. It's just like, where do we fall in this grand scheme of importance with it on a day-to-day basis? But again, these numbers are reflecting that it's being addressed, which we're happy about. We're going to monitor that over time to see if we start to see, see the decline. I don't know, unfortunately, fortunately, the reality of it is, whatever it might be, I mean, the cell phone is almost glued to most teenagers' hands right now. It becomes an extension of them, and that's what we're butting up against in schools. It is a substantial distraction, which is why the secondaries wanted to focus on it this year.
Thank you.
The last thing, just so you guys know, there's a sheet on there, and it kind of gives our week by week. We monitor this about every 2 weeks. I pull this chart up just to see where we're at. You can see it's broken down over the last 4 school years. And that's just the total number of office discipline referrals that we see on a week-by-week basis. So this does factor into the discussion that we have with the discipline committee, and it's just a good monitoring tool for us over the course of the school year. It's updated at midnight every night. So because this information, like you'll see this week, week 8, you'll see the number is very low on the yellow line. That has Monday's information on it. If we pulled this report on Friday and had a meeting on Friday, you'd see it would be much higher.
Any other questions, discussion on that item? Mr. Moore?
Also, how are the with some of these incidents with dealing with students, how has it been with, working with some of the parents as well on, resetting the expectations and setting, ground rules so that they understand too, hey, these are our expectations and we're saying it with you and your child so that, both of you know that they must be followed at all time within school district policy.
Yeah, we have a full range of response when we reach out to parents, from supportive, I'll follow up at home, to accusing us that we're making something up and my kid didn't do anything wrong. And so, I mean, we get the full range, from fully supportive and we know that the kid's phone is going to be taken away along with the car keys and essentially their freedom for a while. And we get other situations where, don't bother me with this. So, I mean, that does become a challenge when, if we're going to reshape behavior, it's a multi-pronged approach. There's the school, there's the classroom, there's the administrator, there's certainly the family buy-in on it. And, we're very appreciative when we get the support, but when it doesn't happen, then it becomes a challenge to turn things around.
Thank you.
Anything else on this item? Okay, moving on to recommendations for future meetings. Does anybody have anything they'd like put on the agenda for next month? Well, if you do, email Joe and I and we'll get it on the agenda. Next up is closed session. We need for it. So we're looking for a motion to move into closed session.
So move.
Yeah, I'd like you to read it. You have to read it.
So I move to adjourn to closed session pursuant to Wisconsin statutes 19.85, parent 1, parent D, to consider strategy for crime detection or prevention, specifically to discuss building safety plans and procedures.
Excellent. Is there a second? Second. Second by Mrs. Zenobia. The roll call. I'm going to call the roll.
Michelle, you want to call the roll?
Mr. Montijo?
Aye.
Mr. Borowski?
Aye.
Mr. McCaffrey?
Aye.
Mr. Zenobia?
Aye.
Mr. Moore?
Aye.
All righty. Passes 5-0. We are in closed session.